Hello, I welcome you all in the lecture series of memory. Today, we are going to extend our discussion on meta memory. Earlier, we discussed about the meta memory, the processes, and how the monitoring and control are contributing individually towards the acquisition, retention, and retrieval process. We even discussed about the multifunctions. Along with that, the flexibility of the system itself. On one hand, when monitoring is providing a lot of flexibility, lot of functionalities, lot of functions to the meta memory and towards the encoding, retention and retrieval, same time the control processes is being less flexible, trying to be more specific towards the acquisition, retention and retrieval. We even discussed about the feeling of knowing and tip of the tongue, and in some aspect we also discussed about the judgment of learning. Now the judgments of learning we are going to discuss in detail in today's lecture. In addition to that, the feeling of knowing. The type of judgments or the which we are discussing about with respect to memory, one of such phenomena is the tip of the tongue states. Tip of the tongue states we have been discussing, and we know we have learned earlier that something which you are knowing and is there with you, however the complete retrieval is not there. Why this complete retrieval is not there? Why this failure in accuracy or failure in retrieval is happening? Is this failure permanent or temporary in nature? Though we understood from empirical evidences that tip of the tongue phenomena is temporary inaccessibility, however in some instances we still know that sometime it could prolong. When we talk about the tip of the tongue states, there are three parameters which we have to address and are considered as the core characteristics of the tip of the tongue states. What are these core characteristics? Inaccessibility, where an item is stored in our storage, however available in the memory system but cannot be retrieved at present. So here we are not talking about is a storage, the information is stored, the information has been encoded and stored. If encoding and storage is not there, then we cannot talk about the retrieval. Something which is not present in the system, you cannot access it. So here when we are talking about the accessibility, then we are talking about and we are knowing that the information is encoded and is there in the system itself. So inaccessibility says that the item is stored or available in the memory but cannot be retrieved at the present moment. Second characteristic is availability. So all the information is stored in the memory should be available to the individual, or should it not be? If all information is available to the person, then too much accessibility, too much access to the information may result into other complications and other chaos. It may even bring a lot of cognitive load to the individual to understand, to select, to decide which information is relevant to the task and which information is not relevant to the task. So complete accessibility may not be a good solution, and complete accessibility to all the information which is stored may even not be possible ecologically. So some sort of inhibitory control is always there which ensures that the individual can execute the task without of much complication, and that is what exactly we have studied in the at the time of working memory, where the buffers were being installed and naturally these buffers ensures that not all the auditory memory, not all the visual memory just rush in to the central executive system. The third characteristic is the accessibility. So, the information that is currently retrieval, what we can retrieve it, what information we have access to. And if you remember, earlier we have discussed that whatever the information an individual is acquiring, he or she tries to categorize them and organize them. So, when we have categorized them and organized them, then the access of the information, at the time of access, the specific information can be provided, which may help the individual to select the category from the organized categories. This makes the individual to retrieve information accurately and precisely without having any sort of interference, distortion, disruption in the human memory. Now, hence an item is accessible, but eventually it has to be recoverable, because you may access to the information, but then the point is, can we recover that? So, feeling is a subjective state where I know, I do have a feeling that I know, and feeling that I do know this information must be having a reference. The reference, what we are considering here is that whenever we are storing the information, we are storing the information in association. Such association provide easiness and provide aid to the individual who is storing the information for future retrieval. The important concern for us in this whole scenario of tip of the tongue is that the information is available, information can be accessible, or information which is not inaccessible. But the interesting part here is which part of the brain is responsible for that. Which part of the brain is ensuring that the information at the time of need should be accessed without an effort. The system which has to ensure that the information should be available all the time to the individual, so that a smooth and proper execution can be done by an individual. Now, we know when we were discussing in the memory disorder, we discussed briefly that what is happening in Alzheimer's, on dementia, or any sort of amnesia, the loss of information is there. Maybe the information is there, but people are not able to access it. Maybe the information is there, but at the time of availability it is cannot be accessed. So, here similarly we have been discussing the important brain regions, and here also the similar brain structures seems to be playing a role in the tip of the tongue states. What are these brain structures? The prefrontal lobe. The prefrontal lobe is the same as the central executive system, and this prefrontal lobe is there for the meta memory, which is a memory of memory. This memory of memory is ensuring and keeping a monitoring on the system. Any brain region which is doing the monitoring of the incoming information and the present information, that is the frontal cortex. And within the frontal cortex has been divided into two parts. We discussed this earlier also, that is DLPFC, dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, ventromedial prefrontal cortex, orbitofrontal cortex. the coordination of all these three brain structures within the frontal cortex, even the left and right side of PFC, both side. So, left DLPFC, right DLPFC, left VMPFC, right VMPFC, left OFC and right OFC. The coordination of these three brain regions within frontal cortex on each side of the brain is important towards the tip of the tongue states. Now, importantly, if you see this frontal cortex, this region, underneath this cortex is the region which is this cingulate cortex, particularly anterior cingulate cortex. This anterior cingulate cortex which you are seeing on your screen is also being considered as the reward and punishment system. So, from fMRI studies, it is very clear that the reward system, which is the anterior cingulate cortex, shows an heightened activation. So, towards the tip of the tongue state, that the feeling of knowing the answer, the correct, the accuracy is going to be there, and once the answer is there, the anticipation of reward, the prize, being the winner, activates this circuit altogether. So, the tip of the tongue state is showing a heightened activation in the anterior cingulate cortex, dorsolateral prefrontal cortex of the frontal area. Now, feeling of knowing, when we are talking about it, prediction about the future retrievability of the particular item. It predicts if we are going to retrieve the information in future related to a particular item. National Animal of India, National Bird of India, National Flower of India, all these questions, retrieval of information is required. One of these questions or related questions, people may have a feeling of knowing the answer, however, it cannot be retrieved completely. So, here Bill Withers did a very simple study and demonstrated. He recorded the artist who recorded the song I Ain't No Sunshine, recognizing this name among a list of other artists who has given this song. They just have to tell. Similarly, some questions can be asked to them. Who landed on the moon first? We may know the answer, we may not. If we do not know the answer, then assistance can be provided, some more information can be provided, which may assist us, help us in coming up with an answer. So, when we talk about this aspect, feeling of knowing judgment, which can be seen as meta memory investigation, meta memory. So, meta memory investigation, two methods researchers has adopted. First method was being proposed and used by Joseph Hart in 1965. Another method was the game show paradigm by Lynn Rader in 1987. Joseph Hart proposed recall judgment recognition procedure, RJR. Recall the judgment and then you have to recognize it. What is this? Participants have to recall the target of a Q target pair. Now the Q target pair, if we talk about silver, gold, police, kitchen, fork, napkin, petrol, drink. What are these? These are the pairs. One of those could be a target or vice versa, and then the Q will be gold or kitchen or napkin or drink. Any one of these Q will be given and the target should be retrieved. If they are unsuccessful in retrieving the information, then some more information can be provided to them so that they can answer it. Now another point here is the game show paradigm. When we talk about the game show paradigm, a participant is given a question and must indicate two things: that he knows the answer, two things. First, he indicate the answer. What is the answer? If the answer is given in A, B, C, D, E, so he has to indicate which one of these is the answer. For instance, A. And then even if he can't indicate it, then he can also simply tell us that he knows the answer, and this he has to do it as quick as possible, as fast as possible. He has to report it that he knows the answer or indicate that that is the answer. People made know it response faster than they could retrieve the name. So what people made it that, okay, feeling of knowing can easily be estimated, feeling of knowing can easily be evaluated or assessed when people are saying I know it, rather than they are retrieving it, because retrieval cannot be so soon, retrieval cannot be, the time cannot be defined when the person is going to retrieve it. But once they are saying that they know it, then we can estimate that how much they know about the answer. So there are these two paradigms which people have used it. Now when we are talking about the feeling of knowing, that I know the answer, then the question arises, this feeling of knowing can be understood with the Q familiarity. In explaining the underlying mechanism of feeling of knowing, people discussed and talked about the Q familiarity. Are they familiar with the Q? But then the question arises, what is Q? So Q familiarity refers to general information question or sense of familiarity which an individual is having. The kind of fossil fuel which we use in the car, or the kind of fossil fuel we use in the kitchen. LPG we use in the kitchen, CNG we use in the cars. The sense of familiarity, general information question. Q familiarity also means if a Q target pairs elicit a sense of familiarity. What does this mean? Man on the moon question. Here the familiarity is very high. Anybody who has studied in his school, or who has studied or who has interest in the planets and the planetary system, astronomy, then they can easily come up with an answer, Neil Armstrong. Even they doesn't have to be familiar. If you have attended a school, then you may have been exposed to such question. The sense, the cue target pair is eliciting the sense of familiarity. What does this mean? I said police, kitchen. Now we know police cannot be in kitchen. So this is a very peculiar example where the sense of familiarity, which suggests no, they are not too similar. While if I say silver and gold, the sense of familiarity that both are metals and both of these metals are expensive, and both these expensive metals are being used as a jewelry in an Indian context. So the familiarity is high or familiarity can be low. In the study done by Coyette in 2001, they showed when a cue of cue target pair is made arbitrarily more familiar, the feeling of knowing, judgment are higher for that item. If we talk about silver and gold, or if we talk about police and kitchen, they may have high familiarity. If I say jet spray and swimming pool, now both of these do not have so familiar with each other. This pairing, jet spray is used in bathroom inside, swimming pool outside, inside the house, outside the house. So the familiarity, some of us may not be familiar even what jet spray is. Most of us may be familiar with swimming pool is. So the familiarity here seems to be less. But when we talk about silver and gold, fire and fire brigade, doctor and nurse, teacher and student, here the familiarity and the cue target pairing is very high. The interesting question arises here is that what are the underlying neural mechanism for feeling of knowing, just like the tip of the tongue state. Now here the interesting brain region which emerges out, which indicate that there is feeling of knowing. I know the answer, I know, and that I know is coming from the parietal lobe. The parietal lobe, if we understand from the visual area, if the region is going to this side, what system? This is a what system? Visual area to parietal area is known as what system? What is this? But when we talk about the visual area to temporal area, then we are talking about where system or where pathway. So this side where pathway. So the question that I know the answer is actually getting activated or triggered at this brain region. Importantly, the left hemisphere is showing heightened activation versus right hemisphere. So this cerebral asymmetry is being seen here, that the left parietal lobe is showing an activation at the time of feeling of knowing. Now an additional brain region which is coming into this light is the inferior frontal gyrus. So the frontal area also, when we are talking about, so this frontal region, inferior side of it, is playing a similar role. Now we know that any sort of feeling of knowing is a sort of monitoring, and monitoring region definitely has to do some association with the frontal area. The moment we say that we are monitoring, the moment we say we are controlling, the moment we say we are inhibiting, frontal cortex seems to come into light. Of course, the frontal cortex is further being divided into left, right, dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, ventromedial prefrontal cortex, and orbitofrontal prefrontal cortex, left and right side separately. What we have seen when people reported feeling of knowing judgment, inferior frontal cortex showed an activation. This area is not getting activated during the tip of the tongue state. At the tip of the tongue state, anterior prefrontal cortex was getting activated. Anterior cingulate cortex was getting activated. At dorsolateral, prefrontal cortex was getting activated. Now the idea altogether is, judgment of learnings are made during a study, a prediction of future memory performance. So when a cue target word pairing is given, such as the cat, fork, you may have to make a judgment as to whether you will recall the fork or not. When you have been given a word cat in a subsequent test, or will you be able to recall the words which you are familiar with easily? So the cue word, will it be retrieved? Will it be recalled easily? Now the importance of judgment of learning, if we talk about why is it so important for us? For two reasons. One, that it provides an understanding towards the meta memory theory, and secondly, the practical use of it, the practical use of judgments of learning, how judgments of learning can be used and its evaluation can indicate the understanding of our meta memory. So judgment of learning, it offers an advantage over feeling of knowing judgment. So what basically it is doing? Feeling of knowing judgment and tip of the tongue states, and this is can be made on all the items. It is allowing the precise experimental control over the items where we are providing the judgment. People indirectly make judgment of learning, but it directly affects their choices. For instance, when they decide and when they sit to think how they are going to learn or prepare for the exam, once they decide that, then the outcome seems to be aligned with their line of thought as well. So these judgments of learning is important and reflect upon the meta memory processes, how people are going to retrieve the information, what they have to learn, how the recall will be going to happen, is the retrieval will be easier or difficult to make. People use this judgment of learning to guide their study, to know whether they are accurate and whether that accuracy can be improved. We discussed this earlier also when we were talking about the feeling of knowing, judgment of knowing, judgment of learning, that the monitoring was doing a progress monitoring. This progress monitoring is ensuring whatever we are acquiring, how accurately we are acquiring it, and can its accuracy be improved. The judgment of learning in cue target is an important aspect for the researchers, because here the participant is being provided with cue and target both, and he is being asked to predict whether he or she will recall that item later when presented with only the cue. So, when the cue target is given to the individual, the retrieval of it can provide an answer and suggest the practical application of it. So, here he or she will recall the item later when presented only the cue. The cue could be gold, the cue could be black, cat, CNG, puppy, and can they retrieve the target word? Now, in this cue target judgment of learning, the underlying neural mechanism, we discussed about the feeling of knowing neural mechanism, we discussed about the tip of the tongue neural mechanism. It's time for us to understand when people are making the judgments of learning, then which part of the brain is coming into light. Now, such decision, when the cue is given and the target has to be identified, such system can only be governed by the central executive system. What is the central executive system? Prefrontal cortex. And exactly this is what we have seen in the imaging studies, fMRI studies, where the prefrontal lobe is showing an activation once the judgment of learning is there, which indicate that the judgment of learning is residing in the prefrontal lobe of the cerebral cortex. Judgment can be seen as decision making also. So, this decision making area could be the prefrontal lobe as well. Areas of the brain which is unique to the verbal judgment of learning were located at ventromedial prefrontal cortex, lateral prefrontal cortex, and dorsomedial prefrontal cortex. Now, these brain regions seems to be a major contributor in the judgments of learning. Let us summarize what we have studied in this lecture. We studied about the tip of the tongue states. We even tried to understand that the anterior cingulate cortex, dorsal medial prefrontal cortex is getting activated during the tip of the tongue state. The feeling of knowing judgment is showing an activation in the left dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, inferior parietal cortex, inferior prefrontal cortex, parietal cortex, and furthermore we even discussed about the importance of judgments of learning. Why it is important? To understand the theory of meta memory and its practical use. We even tried to understand what are the underlying neural mechanism for judgment of learning. These brain regions which we studied today indicated that three important brain regions collectively together are playing an important role towards meta memory. First, the parietal cortex, prefrontal area and anterior cingulate cortex. The anterior cingulate cortex, which is having projection to the frontal cortex also and also towards the parietal area, but in the tip of tongue phenomena, anterior cingulate cortex is playing an important role and parietal cortex. When we were discussing about the feeling of knowing, we understood that the areas, parietal area is showing an activation rather than the tip of the tongue. Such an understanding gives us an insight about the meta memory, and we even discussed about the tasks which people have used in order to investigate and study the meta memory. I will end this lecture here, and in next lecture we will continue discussing about the aspects of memory, particularly mnemonic, the tool which could be used for the encoding and storage. Thank you.